They thought she was just a waitress, but she was the only one in the room who noticed the sky was aiming back. The glass doors of Morello's reflected the city like a polished mirror, Manhattan light stretching across the night as if nothing dangerous could ever exist in a place this elegant, and inside, the air carried the soft clink of crystal, low jazz humming, and the quiet authority of men who never needed to raise their voices to be obeyed, and at table 7 sat Adrian Volkov, white suit tailored to perfection, posture relaxed, eyes unreadable, the kind of man who didn't look around because the world usually adjusted itself around him, and across the room Zara Coleman moved between tables with practiced invisibility, tray balanced steady in one hand, eyes lowered just enough to be ignored but never unfocused, because she saw everything, she always had, the man who came in 5 minutes ago without ordering, the slight bulge beneath his jacket that wasn't a phone, the way he didn't look at the menu but scanned reflections in the wine rack instead, and then there was the rooftop across the street, a narrow ledge barely noticeable unless you knew where to look, where a shadow shifted just once, just enough to break the pattern of stillness, and Zara's breath caught not in fear but in recognition, because danger didn't announce itself loudly, it whispered through details most people dismissed, the faint tremor in the surface of a half-filled water glass as she set it down, the way a pigeon lifted suddenly from the edge of the building outside, not startled by noise but by presence, and she didn't stop walking, didn't pause, because hesitation was how people got noticed, and noticed was how people got into trouble, but her mind was already calculating distance, angle, timing, seconds measured not by clocks but by instinct, and she knew she had less than 30 seconds before something irreversible happened, and still, no one else in the room seemed to see it. Not the manager barking quiet orders from behind the bar, not the couple laughing too loudly near the window, not even Adrian Volkov himself, who lifted his glass slowly, unaware that somewhere above the city line a decision was being aligned with his existence, and Zara felt the weight of a rule she had lived by for years pressing against her ribs: don't interfere, don't engage, stay invisible, because invisible meant safe, invisible meant you went home at the end of your shift, but tonight invisibility felt like complicity, and for a brief second her fingers tightened around the pen tucked into her apron, and then she moved. Not faster, not slower, just precisely on time, approaching table 7 with the check held steady, her expression neutral, her steps silent against the polished floor, and when she placed the bill beside his glass, she didn't look at him, not directly, because this wasn't a conversation, it was a signal, and in one smooth motion she turned the paper slightly, just enough, the ink already there, a simple arrow drawn across the bottom corner, pointing upward, and beneath it, in small controlled letters, 2 words that could change everything, and then she stepped back as if nothing had happened, as if she had never been there at all, because in a room full of power, the most dangerous move was often the quietest one, and Adrian Volkov's hand hovered just above the bill, unmoving for half a second longer than it should have, as if something invisible had just shifted in the air around him. Adrian did not look up, not immediately, because men like him did not react to surprises, they absorbed them, measured them, decided if they were worth acknowledging, and yet his fingers stopped just above the paper, hovering in a stillness that did not match the easy rhythm of the room around him, and for a fraction of a second the soft jazz, the murmur of conversations, the clinking glasses all seemed distant, like sound underwater, as his eyes shifted downward just enough to catch the ink. The arrow, the words, and nothing in his expression changed, not his jaw, not his posture, not even the slow breath he released through his nose, but something behind his eyes recalculated instantly, because he had lived long enough to know that real warnings never came loudly, they came disguised as nothing at all, and across the room Zara kept moving, tray balanced. Shoulders relaxed, but her pulse counted each second like a metronome, 25, 24, 23, and she did not look back, not even once, because if he was who she thought he was, he would understand without needing her gaze to confirm it, and if he did not, then looking would only draw attention she could not afford, and at table 7 Adrian lifted his glass as if nothing had interrupted his evening, the amber liquid catching the light as he tilted it slightly, and in that reflection he saw it, not clearly, not directly, but enough, a faint line cutting across the skyline, too steady to be random, too precise to be ignored, and his thumb tapped the side of the glass once, twice, a small controlled motion that meant nothing to anyone watching but everything to the 2 men positioned near the bar, who did not move right away, because moving too soon was the same as announcing awareness. And awareness was what turned possibility into action, and so they waited, just as he did, and the second stretched thinner, tighter, until even the air seemed to hold its breath, and Zara reached the edge of the dining floor, setting her tray down behind the service station with steady hands that did not betray the urgency beneath them, and she exhaled slowly, because the decision had already been made, not by her, but by him, and that was the part she could not control, whether he trusted a stranger's silent warning or dismissed it as coincidence, and behind her the manager's voice cut sharply through the low hum, telling someone to move faster, to clear table 4, to stop standing around, but Zara barely heard it, because her focus was fixed on the rhythm of the room, the subtle shifts that signal change, and then Adrian set his glass down, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to break the pattern he had maintained all night, and he leaned back slightly in his chair, adjusting his cuff as if preparing to leave, and the two men near the bar mirrored the movement in their own quiet way, repositioning without drawing eyes, and no one else noticed, not the couple by the window, not the group laughing too loudly near the entrance, because nothing had happened yet, nothing visible, nothing obvious, and that was exactly why it worked, because danger did not need noise to exist, it only needed timing, and as Adrian rose from his seat with the same controlled ease he had shown all evening, his eyes lifted just once, not toward Zara, not toward the rooftop, but toward the reflection in the glass behind the bar, confirming what he already knew. And in that silent exchange between instinct and action, a decision settled into place, one that would change the trajectory of the night without anyone realizing it had ever been close to something else entirely. Zara felt it before she saw it, the shift that did not belong to music or movement but to intention, a subtle tightening of the space as if the room itself had leaned forward to listen, and she turned her head just enough to catch the reflection in the stainless steel panel behind the service station, not directly, never directly, but through angles and fragments, and Adrian was no longer seated, no longer still, he had already moved, already adjusted the pattern of the night in a way that erased the version of events that had almost happened, and for a brief moment something unfamiliar crossed her chest, not relief, not yet, but recognition that he had understood, that the message had not been wasted, and across the dining floor the rhythm continued as if nothing had changed, waiters carrying plates, glasses being refilled, laughter rising and falling, but beneath it all there was a second layer now, quieter, sharper, the kind that only a few people in the room could feel, and Adrian stepped away from table 7 with measured ease, his pace unhurried, his expression unchanged, yet every step placed him further from where he had been moments before, further from the line that had been drawn across the skyline, and near the bar one of his men shifted slightly, positioning himself between the entrance and the main dining area, not blocking, not obvious, just present in a way that altered the flow of movement without anyone noticing why, and Zara reached for another tray, forcing her hands to follow routine, because routine was safety, routine was cover, and anything outside of it would draw the wrong kind of attention, but her eyes continued their quiet scan, checking the rooftop again through the reflection of a glass panel near the wine display, and this time the shadow was gone, not vanished, but relocated, which meant the window had closed, the timing disrupted, the alignment broken, and she exhaled slowly, allowing the tension in her shoulders to release by degrees, not all at once, never all at once, because the moment was not over yet, and at the far end of the room Adrian paused briefly near the hallway leading to the private suites, adjusting his cuff again, a small habitual motion that masked the fact that he was now completely out of the line she had marked, and for the first time since she had drawn the arrow, Zara let herself glance toward him, just for a fraction of a second, enough to confirm what she already sensed, and in that instant his eyes met hers, not by accident, not by chance, but with precise awareness, and there was no gratitude in his gaze, no visible acknowledgement, only a quiet understanding that passed between them, something unspoken but undeniable, and then he looked away, continuing down the hallway as if she had never existed, as if the exchange had never taken place, and the room returned to its original rhythm, conversations flowing, glasses clinking, the illusion of normal intact, but Zara knew better, because once you saw what others missed, you could never return to not seeing, and as she picked up the next order, moving back into the current of the dining floor, one thought settled in the back of her mind with a clarity she could not ignore, this was not over, not for him, and not for her, because men like Adrian Volkov did not leave unanswered questions behind, and tonight she had become one. The hallway swallowed Adrian Volkov without a sound, the soft carpet beneath his shoes muting every step as if the building itself had learned not to echo his presence, and the moment he passed through the double doors leading away from the dining floor, the version of him that had been visible to the public dissolved, replaced by something sharper, more precise, the part of him that did not rely on chance or appearances, and behind him one of his men closed the distance just enough to ensure no one followed too closely, not blocking, not guarding in any obvious way, just existing within reach, and Adrian slowed near the mirrored wall, not to admire his reflection but to study it, because reflections told the truth that direct vision often missed, and for a brief second his eyes traced the line of sight from the rooftop angle he had calculated, mapping where he had been, where he was now, and where the threat had lost him, and his expression did not change, but the stillness around him deepened, like a decision settling into place, and then he spoke, his voice low, controlled, carrying no urgency yet commanding immediate attention, asking one simple question that did not need to be repeated, and the man beside him nodded once before stepping away, already moving to confirm what Adrian had seen without needing further instruction, because in his world, hesitation was the only real mistake, and back on the dining floor Zara continued her shift, her movement steady, her pace measured, but now every sound felt slightly sharper, every glance slightly heavier, as if the room had begun to notice something it could not name, and the manager's voice cut through again, sharper this time, directing her to table 3, asking why she was slowing down, why she was not keeping up, and she answered with the same quiet tone she always used, respectful, neutral, giving nothing away, because drawing attention now would undo everything, and yet beneath that calm surface her mind replayed the sequence again and again, not the danger, not the rooftop, but the moment his eyes met hers, because that had not been random, that had not been luck, that had been recognition, and recognition meant memory, and memory meant consequence. And she understood that men like Adrian did not forget details that mattered, especially when those details involved someone breaking the rules of his world, and as she set down a plate at table 3, adjusting the fork slightly to align with the edge of the napkin, she felt the weight of that realization settle deeper, because she had crossed a line tonight, not by speaking, not by acting loudly, but by choosing to be seen in a way she had avoided her entire life, and across the room one of the bar mirrors caught a flicker of movement near the entrance, a subtle shift in posture from one of Adrian's men as he returned, his steps calm, his expression unchanged, but there was something in the way he paused near the hallway, something in the stillness that followed, that told Zara the answer had already been found, and seconds later Adrian stepped back into view, not hurried, not tense, just as composed as before, as if the interruption had been nothing more than a brief adjustment to an otherwise ordinary evening, and yet the air around him felt different now, quieter, heavier, the kind of silence that followed a decision already made, and he did not return to his table, did not resume his seat. Instead he walked slowly along the edge of the dining floor, his gaze drifting across the room not in search but in confirmation, until it reached the service station where Zara stood, and for a moment that stretched longer than it should have, everything else seemed to fade, the music, the voices, the movement, leaving only the space between them, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried just enough to reach her without drawing the attention of anyone else, a single sentence, calm and deliberate, asking her to come with him. And in that instant Zara understood that the night she had tried to keep invisible had just stepped fully into the light. Zara did not move right away, not because she had not heard him, but because she understood exactly what that quiet sentence meant, and in her world hesitation was the only thing that could still protect her, even if just for a second longer, and the tray in her hands felt heavier than it should have as she set it down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the service station as if precision could buy her time. And around her the restaurant continued untouched, the same low hum of conversations, the same polished rhythm of service, no one noticing that something irreversible had just shifted between a man who controlled outcomes and a woman who had interrupted one, and when she finally turned, she did not rush, did not show urgency, because urgency would make her visible to everyone else, and visibility was never part of the plan, but Adrian was already watching her, not impatient, not demanding, simply waiting with the certainty of someone who had never been refused, and as she stepped toward him the distance between them felt longer than it was, each step measured, each breath steady, until she stopped just close enough to hear him. Without raising her voice, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because words were not the first thing either of them relied on, and Adrian studied her the way he studied everything, not her uniform, not the tray she had just set aside, but the stillness in her posture, the absence of panic, the control she carried in a place where she had no authority, and that was the detail that mattered. And when he finally spoke his voice remained calm, almost conversational, asking how long she had been working there, as if the question itself held more weight than the answer, and Zara responded with a number that sounded ordinary, because it was, months that blended into shifts and schedules and routine, but there was nothing ordinary about the way she held his gaze just long enough before looking away, not submissive, not defiant, simply balanced, and that was when he asked the question that mattered, not what she saw, not what she wrote, but how she knew, and the space between them seemed to narrow as the words settled, because that question was not about the moment on the rooftop, it was about everything behind it, every decision, every instinct that led her to act when others did not, and Zara felt the weight of that truth press against her ribs, because answering it meant revealing more than she had intended, and silence stretched just long enough to be noticed. And in that silence she understood that there was no version of this conversation where she walked away unchanged, and so she chose the simplest truth, the one that did not explain everything but could not be dismissed, and she told him that she was paying attention, and for the first time something shifted in Adrian's expression, not surprise, not disbelief, but recognition, as if he had been given the answer he expected but not from the person he expected to hear it from, and behind him one of his men shifted slightly, waiting for instruction that had not yet come, because Adrian had not decided what to do with her, not yet, and Zara could feel that pause, that calculation, like a weight suspended in the air. And then he did something that neither the room nor his men anticipated, he stepped slightly to the side, opening the path toward the hallway he had just returned from, not forcing, not commanding, but offering a direction that was not really a choice, and without raising his voice he told her to walk with him, because this conversation was not meant for the noise of the dining floor, and as Zara glanced briefly toward the manager, toward the table she was supposed to serve, she realized that the life she had been holding onto just minutes ago was already slipping out of reach, not taken, not stolen, but replaced by something she could not yet see, and when she took her first step beside him, matching his pace, the distance between who she had been at the start of the night and who she was becoming closed quietly behind her, leaving no trace for anyone else to notice. The hallway felt different the moment Zara stepped into it, not because of the lighting or the silence, but because it stripped away the illusion of the dining room, leaving only what mattered, intention, control, and the quiet weight of decisions that did not need witnesses, and Adrian walked beside her without looking at her, his pace steady, unhurried, as if this path had been taken countless times before. Yet there was a subtle shift in the air around him, something more focused now, more deliberate, and Zara matched his pace instinctively, not too fast, not too slow, because anything else would reveal uncertainty, and uncertainty was something she had learned to hide long before tonight, and when they reached the private suite at the end of the corridor, the door opened before Adrian even touched it, one of his men already anticipating the movement, and inside the room the city light stretched across the windows, a panoramic view that made everything below seem distant, manageable, controllable, and Adrian stepped in first, pausing just long enough for Zara to follow before the door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have, sealing the space into something separate from the rest of the world, and for the first time since the moment she drew the arrow, Zara felt the full weight of where she was. Not in fear, but in awareness, because this was not a place meant for someone like her, and yet she had been brought here, not by mistake, but by choice, and Adrian moved toward the center of the room, removing his jacket slowly, placing it over the back of a chair with the same precision he applied to everything, and when he turned to face her, there was no distraction left, no noise, no movement, just the space between them and the question that had not yet been fully answered. And he did not raise his voice, did not step closer, but the intensity of his attention filled the room more than any action could have, and he asked her again, not differently, not louder, but with a clarity that left no room for deflection, "How did you know?" And this time the silence that followed felt heavier, because there was nowhere left to hide behind routine or distance, and Zara stood still, her hands relaxed at her sides, her posture steady, but inside her thoughts moved quickly, not searching for an answer, but choosing which truth to reveal. Because there were layers to what she knew, layers built from observation, from experience, from things she had never spoken about in places like this, and she understood that whatever she said next would define how he saw her, not just tonight, but from this moment forward, and so she lifted her eyes just enough to meet his, holding the gaze a second longer than before, not challenging, not yielding, simply present, and she told him that people always looked at what was in front of them, but rarely at what was reflected back, and that reflections did not lie if you knew how to read them, and Adrian watched her closely as she spoke, not interrupting, not reacting immediately, but something in his expression shifted again, a subtle narrowing of focus, as if each word was being placed into a pattern he was beginning to understand, and after a moment he asked her what she had been before this, not accusing, not assuming, just asking, because someone who noticed what she noticed did not learn that skill serving tables, and Zara felt that question settle deeper than the first, because it reached beyond the moment, beyond the rooftop, into the part of her life she had left behind for a reason. And for a brief second her gaze dropped toward the floor, not in submission, but in consideration, because answering that question would not just explain her actions, it would expose the path that led her here, and when she looked back up, the room seemed even quieter, as if waiting for a truth that could not be taken back once spoken. Zara held his gaze just long enough to make the silence mean something, not defiance, not fear, but a decision forming in real time, and when she finally spoke her voice remained steady, quiet but clear, as if she had already accepted the weight of what she was about to reveal, and she told him that before this she had been trained to notice patterns that did not belong, to see movement where others saw stillness, to understand that the smallest detail could carry the largest consequence, and she did not name the place or the title, because those things were not what defined it, but the way she said it left no doubt that it had been something structured, something disciplined, something far removed from carrying trays and clearing tables, and Adrian did not interrupt, did not question the gaps, because the gaps were part of the truth, and he understood that people like her did not leave that kind of world without a reason, and when she finished speaking the room settled into a deeper stillness, the kind that came when two people recognized something in each other that the rest of the world would miss, and Adrian took a slow step closer, not invading her space, but closing the distance just enough to study her without obstruction, and his eyes moved not over her face, but through it, as if mapping the difference between who she appeared to be and who she actually was, and then he asked why she left, not as an accusation, not as a demand, but as a continuation of the same quiet interrogation that had begun the moment she drew the arrow, and Zara felt that question land heavier than the others, because it reached into a part of her life she had worked to keep separate, a line she had drawn long before tonight, and for a moment her eyes shifted toward the window, toward the city lights stretching out below, as if the distance might offer her a way to answer without saying everything, and when she spoke again there was a slight change in her tone, not weaker, not uncertain, but more grounded, as if each word had to pass through something deeper before it could be spoken, and she said that sometimes knowing what to look for meant seeing things you could not ignore, and once you saw enough of that, staying became a choice you could no longer justify, and she did not elaborate further, because she did not need to, and Adrian understood that as clearly as if she had given him a full account, because in his world the reasons people left were rarely simple, and they were almost never safe, and for a brief moment neither of them spoke, the silence stretching again, but this time it carried something different, not tension, but alignment, as if the space between them had shifted from questioning to understanding, and then Adrian turned slightly, walking toward the window, his reflection merging with the city beyond, and when he spoke again his voice was quieter, more deliberate, as if he had already reached a conclusion he had not yet shared, and he told her that people with her instincts did not disappear into places like this by accident, and that surviving by pretending to be invisible was a skill, not a coincidence, and Zara remained where she was, not following, not stepping back, simply holding her position as she listened, because this was no longer about what she had done, it was about what he was about to decide, and after a moment he turned back toward her, his expression composed but different in a way that was almost imperceptible, and he asked her one final question, not about the rooftop, not about her past, but about her future, asking if she intended to keep pretending she did not see what others missed, or if tonight had changed that, and the question settled into the room with a quiet finality, because it was not just a question, it was a line being drawn, one that would determine whether she returned to the life she had tried to hold on to or stepped into something that would not allow her to disappear again. And as Zara stood there, feeling the weight of that choice for the first time, she realized that the moment she picked up the pen and drew that arrow, she had already answered it. The question did not echo in the room, but it stayed there, suspended between them with a weight that neither of them could ignore, and Zara did not answer immediately, not because she did not know what to say, but because she understood that this was not a question meant for quick responses. It was the kind that separated one life from another, and for a moment her eyes moved again toward the city beyond the glass. The lights stretching endlessly across Manhattan, each one a story, a choice, a path taken or abandoned, and she thought about the version of herself that had walked into this building hours ago, quiet, unnoticed, moving through the night with the simple goal of finishing a shift and going home, and that version felt distant now, not gone, but already fading, because something had shifted the moment she chose to act, and she knew there was no returning to that exact point, no matter what she said next. And when she looked back at Adrian, her expression had not hardened, had not softened, it had simply settled into something more certain, and she told him that pretending was never meant to be permanent, that it was a way to survive, not a way to live, and the words came without hesitation because they had been forming long before tonight, shaped by every moment she had chosen to look away, to stay silent, to remain invisible when she could have stepped forward, and Adrian listened without interruption. His posture unchanged, his attention unwavering, but there was a subtle shift in the way he regarded her now, not as someone who had crossed into his world by accident, but as someone who understood the cost of stepping into it, and when she finished speaking the silence that followed did not feel uncertain, it felt complete, as if the answer had already aligned with the decision he was about to make, and he moved then, not closer, not away, but toward the table near the window, reaching for a glass that had been placed there earlier, untouched, and he turned it slightly, watching how the light caught the surface, how the reflection shifted with even the smallest movement, and for a brief second it mirrored the same principle she had described, that what mattered was not always what you looked at directly, but what you allowed yourself to see beyond it, and when he set the glass down his gaze returned to her, steady, deliberate, and he told her that there were two kinds of people in his world, those who ignored what they saw because it was easier, and those who acted on it even when it changed everything, and he did not need to explain which one she had proven herself to be, because that had already been decided the moment she picked up the pen, and Zara felt the meaning behind his words settle into place, not as praise, not as approval, but as acknowledgement, the kind that carried expectation rather than comfort, and then he made his offer, not dramatically, not with emphasis, but with the same calm certainty that defined everything he did, telling her that someone with her instincts did not belong serving tables in a place like this, and that if she chose to step into a different role, one where what she saw actually mattered, she would not be alone in navigating it, and the room seemed to grow quieter around that statement, because it was more than an opportunity, it was a doorway, one that did not open often and did not stay open long, and Zara did not move, did not respond right away, because she understood that accepting it would not just change her work, it would change the direction of everything that followed, and as the city lights continued to flicker beyond the glass, reflecting across the room in quiet patterns, she realized that the choice in front of her was not about fear or safety anymore, it was about whether she was ready to stop surviving and start stepping into the part of herself she had spent so long trying to hide. Zara let the silence stretch just long enough to make her answer belong to her and not to the pressure of the moment, and when she finally moved it was not dramatic, not sudden, just a small shift forward that closed the invisible distance between who she had been and what she was choosing to become, and she told him that she understood what he was offering, not just the position, not just the change in work, but the reality that came with it, the expectation to see more, to act more, to step into situations where there would be no safe distance, and her voice did not waver because this was not a decision built in a second, it had been forming long before tonight. In every moment she chose to stay silent when she should have spoken, and Adrian watched her without interruption, his expression unchanged but his attention sharper now, as if measuring not the words but the certainty behind them, and when she finished she did not ask what would happen next, did not negotiate or hesitate. She simply said yes, and the words settled into the room with a quiet finality that carried more weight than anything louder ever could, and for a brief moment nothing moved, not the city lights beyond the window, not the air between them, as if the world itself paused to register the shift, and then Adrian nodded once, a small motion but absolute, the kind that turned decisions into outcomes, and he stepped past her toward the door, not looking back because he did not need to, and when it opened his men were already in place, already aware that something had changed even if they did not yet know what, and Zara followed without being told, her step steady, her posture unchanged, but everything about the way she moved carried a different weight now, not invisible, not uncertain, but aligned with something larger than the routine she had left behind, and as they walked back through the hallway the sounds of the restaurant began to return. The low hum of voices, the clink of glasses, the rhythm of a world that had continued without noticing how close it had come to breaking its own pattern, and when they stepped onto the dining floor again no one looked twice, no one paused, because to everyone else nothing had happened, nothing had changed, and that was the part Zara understood most clearly now, that the most important moments rarely announced themselves, they passed quietly, leaving only those involved to carry their meaning forward, and Adrian did not return to table 7, did not resume the version of the evening he had abandoned, instead he moved toward the exit with the same calm certainty, and just before he stepped through the doors he paused for a fraction of a second, not turning, not speaking loudly, but saying enough for her to hear, telling her to be ready in the morning, and then he was gone, disappearing into the night that had almost taken something from him but instead had given him something he had not expected, and Zara stood there for a moment longer, the tray, the tables, the manager's voice all still within reach, but no longer part of her direction, and as she looked down at her hands, the same hands that had carried plates and written orders, she realized they had just altered the course of her life with a single line of ink, and when she lifted her gaze again the room felt different, not because it had changed, but because she had, and without another word she untied the apron at her waist, folding it neatly before placing it on the service counter, leaving it there like a quiet marker of who she had been just hours ago, and as she walked toward the exit the lights of the city stretched out in front of her, no longer something to observe from a distance, but something she was finally stepping into, and that night, in a room full of people who never noticed her, she became impossible to ignore.